I'm a psychiatrist in San Francisco with a mostly psychotherapy practice. I was a published psychotherapy researcher early in my career, and for decades I've taught psychiatry residents, that is, doctors specializing in psychiatry, about psychotherapy. Today I'll talk about emotional trauma. Trauma is a word used a lot in mental health these days, a little loosely in my opinion. So in this video, we'll talk about what emotional trauma is and ways to deal with it, both professionally and otherwise. I'm Dr. Stephen Reidbord, and this is More Than Meds, where I talk about psychotherapy and psychologically informed psychiatry. The word trauma comes from medical practice, where doctors talk about abdominal trauma from a gunshot wound, or limb trauma from an accident, or head trauma. As you can tell, the word trauma doesn't refer to the thing that caused the injury, it refers to the injury itself. And that's true as well when we're talking about emotional trauma. The trauma isn't the thing that hurt you, it's the hurt itself, the injury. For that reason, emotional trauma is subjective. It depends on what the individual person is feeling. Now, some situations are generally traumatic, that is, cause emotional trauma in almost anyone who experiences them. Things like being physically assaulted or being physically tortured, or certain wartime experiences that are really extreme. But these are obviously exceptions. Much more commonly, there are experiences that cause emotional trauma or injury in most people, but the amount varies, and for some people, maybe not even very much. Things like betrayal by a romantic partner, being suddenly laid off or fired from work, going through a messy divorce. And then there are situations that some people, a few, might consider traumatic, but most people would not. Getting a low grade in school, having a usual run-of-the-mill argument with a family member, being rejected for a date, or maybe if you've asked for a raise at work and you don't get it. The point is, people differ in how they react to the same situation. For that reason, there are two general ways to look at emotional trauma. One is to look at the kinds of situations that cause emotional trauma in most people. That's important to know, that crime and assault and certain kinds of economic strains and so forth are emotionally traumatizing as a rule, not universally, but generally speaking. The other way of looking at it is, given a particular situation that may be traumatic for many people, why is it that some people are injured more than others? Even in extreme wartime situations, for example, some of the combatants suffer PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, one particular kind of emotional trauma. And others who experience the very same thing don't. And the question is why? Running across your screen right now is one study that looked at Vietnam veterans, some of whom experienced post-traumatic stress disorders and others did not, even though they were exposed to the same kinds of traumatic experiences. And the study found that some of the factors that made a difference were pre-existing personality and previous exposure to emotional trauma prior to ever serving in the military. So if you look at it that way, in terms of the individual differences, some factors that you think about are maybe the person's inherent stress tolerance, maybe that they were born with, the coping skills or defense mechanisms that are part of their personality that they've developed over the years, their social supports, and the particular meaning that that traumatic experience had for them. And we'll talk about particular meanings in a few minutes. Since emotional trauma varies so much, there's a number of ways to deal with it. Most mild trauma doesn't require any professional intervention. It's a fact of life. We grow and develop and actually improve over the years thanks to emotional challenges. Following uncomfortable experiences, we get more resilient, better able to handle similar experiences in the future. Think of a young child who cries or throws a tantrum at every minor disappointment or hunger pang. We outgrow that. As we develop, we establish ways of handling emotional trauma through our lives. We use the defense mechanisms built into our personalities. Some people use humor and other people avoidance or denial. We may turn to the support of our family or our friends, our religious institutions. We may exercise or yell or take it out on other people. It's not always positive to look at, but eventually we deal. We deal with the emotional pain and it passes. We may also sit with the feelings and digest them, so to speak. Work them over in our minds and in our feelings so that we experience them, but we get past them. We let them flow through us and we have our feelings, but then we let them go. For most of us, this happens every day, so much that we don't even notice it. Unfortunately, more severe trauma can overwhelm our coping mechanisms and make it impossible for us to learn and grow from it. This is the emotional version of indigestion. Just like if you eat something that sits in your stomach and doesn't move along and it just makes you feel bad, emotional indigestion is like that too. It's a feeling that kind of sits there and is stuck there and it makes you feel bad and you can't move past it or have it move past you. Your mind can't process the feelings and put them to rest, and the emotional pain doesn't go away. That's when psychotherapy can help. Psychotherapy heals trauma in several different ways. Just having someone to talk to can be very helpful. The ability to put the feelings into words, hear yourself say them, to be able to confide in another person. And since self-criticism and self-blame so often add to emotional distress, the non-judgmental acceptance of the therapist can be healing as well. After that, there's a divergence, a set of different kinds of paths, depending on the school or style of psychotherapy that we're talking about. In CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, the therapist helps to identify unhelpful thoughts that the person's having that maintain the emotional pain. Maybe you've always told yourself that you should be able to work things out with your family members, but in this case you couldn't. Or you tell yourself you can, quote, never do anything right. Or that after this thing that you experienced, your life will be a failure from now on, will be a disaster, even though that's not really true. By consciously correcting these mistaken ideas or cognitions, you may be able to ease the feelings that go with them. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, usually abbreviated EMDR, is a somewhat controversial variation on cognitive behavioral therapy, where in addition to paying attention to the thoughts connected with the feelings, the therapist also directs the client to shift their eyes back and forth or to tap on alternate sides of their body. There's a theory that that will help lessen the emotional impact of the memories that are traumatic. Studies are inconclusive about whether the eye movements or the tapping really adds anything above and beyond the verbal part of the therapy, but it does seem to help on par with other forms of cognitive behavioral approaches. A different emphasis by somatic therapists focuses on the way emotional trauma shows up in the body, the way an emotionally traumatized person holds that tension in their muscles or tense postures, a kind of symbolic defense physically against an emotional assault, or the way emotional pain manifests as physical pain, as in headaches or stomach aches. As with CBT, becoming conscious of these physical manifestations that go with the emotional pain can ease the emotional pain that goes with them. Psychodynamic therapy, the kind that I practice and that I talk about on this channel, addresses trauma through an exploration of meaning. Why a particular experience was traumatic for that individual. It looks at the individual variation, the fact that certain people are more emotionally injured than others given the same situation. For example, some disturbing situations shake our sense of ourselves, our self-identity. We thought we could handle situations like that, and it turned out that we couldn't. We let ourselves down. We're disappointed in ourselves. Or they shake our trust in other people. We thought we could rely on our family or on our friends. Turns out we couldn't. Trust builds slowly, but it can be destroyed in an instant. It's hard to digest and get past a real betrayal. Also, many troubling experiences stir up feelings in us that we'd really rather not have, like an impulse to violently take retaliation or revenge. Emotional distress, trauma, can result from our own efforts to hold our feelings inside, to deny them in ourselves, or just not to let them show. It takes a lot of energy to do that, and it shows up in emotional pain. In these and similar cases, psychotherapy, especially psychodynamic psychotherapy, helps to heal trauma through gaining insight, a deep understanding of one's own thoughts and feelings that goes beyond just knowing it in your head, but knowing it in your bones, feeling it in your guts. It's actually a custom-made treatment for emotional indigestion. It helps you digest or metabolize troubling emotional experiences so that, like the lesser emotional traumas that we face every day, even these more painful ones help us to grow. It's important to note that sometimes very severe trauma is too painful to talk about in therapy, actually too painful to put into words at all. In such cases, physical or somatic types of therapy have to come first. Later, when the client is able to sit down and speak with another person about what happened and also what's going on inside them, then psychotherapy can begin. To sum up, trauma is the subjective, individual emotional injury that follows an experience. It can vary from no injury at all to very severe. Minor emotional trauma is a daily experience, something that helps us learn and grow, helps us become more resilient over time. But more severe trauma can be overwhelming and hard to manage or digest by yourself, and therefore it benefits from professional help, mainly psychotherapy, as long as the person's able to talk about it. Well, that's it for this time. Was this discussion of emotional trauma helpful? Are there more things you'd like to know? Tell me in the comments. Please like this video, but only if you really like it. Please subscribe if you have not already. And here's another video about psychotherapy and psychologically informed psychiatry. See you next time.